Hello, my name's Amanda Foxon-Hill and this is Suddenly Autistic, the video channel where I share, the findings from my self-investigation into my autism, me being autistic, whatever you want to call it. I was diagnosed with autism one and a half, a little while ago, can't remember exactly. But a short time ago compared to my long life of 48 now-ish years. So basically most of that time I didn't know I was autistic. No idea, no clue. Now I know I can try and integrate that into my reality and look back on my life and see what's going on. Along with my autism diagnosis came a diagnosis of generalised anxiety disorder, and it's anxiety that I want to talk about specifically today. For me, it comes hand in hand with being autistic, especially the way I present to the world. So I want to talk about anxiety and generalised anxiety disorder, which I have an official diagnosis of and am being treated, I suppose, or coached or whatever, cheerleaded on through. And I think it's worth talking about because I didn't know I was anxious as an adult. It didn't seem like anything that I'd felt. I imagined people with anxiety to be the type that sit at home and don't really go to anything and crumble under pressure and live fairly small lives as a consequence of this crippling anxiety that they feel. And that can definitely be the case, and thankfully it's not the case for me. However, I still have anxiety to a level that affects my functioning, and it's this generalised anxiety disorder. So let's talk about that. I'll share a bit of the official diagnosis of that, and then I want to go through how that manifests in my life, and like I said, how that crosses into or marries up with the autism. So generalised anxiety disorder is uncontrollable worry. It's constant and it comes across it manifests in different spheres of your life, of life. It's uncontrollable and pervasive. And that word pervasive is really, really important because that means the anxiety spreads widely. Everybody feels anxious. Feeling anxious is a feeling, and we all have all the feelings. Anxiety is not a pointless emotion. It helps us to take a step back and breathe and think and to protect ourselves or to be cautious. So anxiety as an emotion is not something that anybody should be cured of. But once the anxiety becomes life altering and starts taking on a dimension that then impacts how we live our life, which is life altering, what we do and how we achieve our goals, or if we even try to achieve our goals, then that's where it is worth looking into. Sometimes with therapy, sometimes just with friends and family, and sometimes on our own, examining ourselves, processing all of this. As I said, I didn't know I was an anxious adult as such. I knew I was an anxious child. I could have won a medal for anxiety as a child. I worried about everything and I had a rich imagination, and was also very hungry for knowledge. So I would soak up any information I could from the adult world. I'd listen in on conversations to try and get clues as to what's going to happen so I could be prepared. I would read the news, I'd watch the news, I'd talk about the news and current affairs with anyone who'd listen. And often I misunderstood what was going on, or only had half of the information, and then my imagination would make up the rest. So I'd hear of a child drowning on a beach close to where we went on holidays with the family, and imagine all children drowned at that beach. And the same with the Falklands War, which happened while I was a child. I heard about this going on and, rumblings that it wasn't a good thing and, whatever's happening. And imagine the Falkland Islands were just off Scotland, which I know I wasn't alone in imagining, but I took my anxiety and my fears to a great level. And rather than ask my parents, well, have I got this right? What's going on here? I packed up everything in my bedroom and sat looking out the window for the bombs to drop. So everything was like all my books and everything as if I was going to flee. That is anxiety. It's something that takes over and that creates a bigger problem than there perhaps is, or even takes a big problem that there is and obsesses about it and frames everything else around that. It doesn't put it in a place. The anxiety kind of stops processing. You are stuck, I feel. I've been many times stuck in a bubble of anxiety, of thoughts, of a reality that's not necessarily real. And that's not to say that it's a detachment from reality. There's a lot of plausibility, and of course, everyday life does go on. But it goes on with this threat and this level of preparedness inside your body that's really fight, flight, fawn or freeze constantly. Generalised anxiety disorder usually feeds into, or is fed by, I guess, the 5 primal fears that we all have as humans, and that's abandonment, loss of identity, loss of meaning, loss of purpose, and fear of death and pain. I wanted to go through the ones, or talk a little bit about each one of those as it relates to me and my anxiety, and give some examples with the hope that it helps other people who were perhaps like I was before I got my diagnosis and started looking into it, who maybe have an idea of what anxiety is that's not quite the whole ticket, if you like, not quite the whole thing. And as such, they might miss anxiety in themselves or misunderstand anxiety in others, and then maybe not give them the caring and the space that they need to help process that. So primal fears are fears that they're innate to the human experience. They're programmed into our brains. They're fears that are natural because of the way we've evolved and because of our human vulnerabilities. So it makes sense to have an abandonment fear, because humans don't tend to do very, very well when they're completely ostracised and alone. We all rely on other people from time to time, and most of us also desire the company and validation and love of others. The abandonment primal fear is a funny one for me, because as somebody who's autistic and knows it now, I have often felt that I prefer autonomy. I'm not the kind of person who actually does that much better with a lot of other people. I like to be on my own, and I'm often moving away from people as opposed to towards them. I understand that can be caused by problems with attachment in neurotypical people, who are then anxious and fearful and trying to protect themselves from what other people might do to them or want from them. But for me, it feels that there could be a bit of that in it for me. But more than that, it's a natural orientation. I suppose it's like any other orientation we feel naturally. We don't exactly know why or how this has happened, but it's the right thing for me. I'm naturally orientated to be alone and to enjoy my company and to socialise with myself in my own head, doing my own thing. That's not to say that I don't thrive with relationships. I do, but I still need my own space within those relationships. I still need my own time to decompress from social contact. So a primal fear of abandonment is one that I personally, just thinking about me, myself and I, don't resonate with that deeply, although it can be the cause of a lot of people's anxiety. Where the fear of abandonment does kick in for me now as an adult is certainly around my family, my children who are now young adults, and around my husband. I don't so much have a fear around my husband abandoning me or leaving me under any circumstances, death, disaster, whatever, getting remarried, whatever it is. I honestly don't give that much thought because he's another adult. There's not a lot I can do, about any of that. Where it does come in is, and especially as my children were younger, was the fear of losing my children. And this still kicks in now, the fear of losing my children, mostly emotionally, and that bond, I suppose, that relational bond. I do feel like I have a deep relational bond with my children in my own way, and that it's unique to both of them. I've got a different relationship with one to I have with the other, although they have a lot in common. The fear of abandonment I would respond to is not so much them leaving me or not wanting to be with me or not wanting to share everything with me, because that's natural. That's absolutely natural. They can go where they like, do what they like, and share what they like with me. It's of losing that respect or not actually fostering that, or that acknowledgement of where you came from, that bond, that basic bond, that denial of that reality in all its guises, good, bad and ugly and beautiful and wonderful. So that is a little bit of a fear, but I wouldn't say that's one of my key fears. But abandonment fears are something to think about for everybody, because usually there's something there. My fear around my identity now is different to my fear I had around my loss of a potential loss of identity when I was a younger adult, a mother, a teenager, a child, whatever. I feel that, especially as I've grown and changed, and as the world has changed around me, my identity has both stayed exactly the same and also shifted to take on these roles and responsibilities that exist both outside of us and inside of us. It's a kind of, a moulding. We get moulded and changed, and we ebb and flow with it. So if I talk about myself now, the anxiety I feel around my identity being lost is more about when I am triggered in a life situation. Usually it's work, and I'm in my lab here. This is my work environment. So often I get quite anxious about situations at work where I feel invalidated, where I feel equivalenced, like where my specialised skill set is taken away and commoditised, or undervalued. So for me, it's not really that I lose my identity and I fear that I have lost my identity in the world and I don't know who I am anymore. I have now got a firm grasp on who I am and what I am and where I'm going, and I'm still struggling with having that realised and reflected in society. Some people seem to be happy to hold that perspective of me and treat me and welcome me accordingly, and other people don't, and find it really, really hard to accommodate the fact that being with me now being autistic means that some of my behaviour that they might have otherwise thought was me being rude or aggressive or dominating or dismissive or not caring or shoddy, any of these negative words, that is a manifestation of one of my autistic struggles or one of my autistic frustrations. And that, yes, I still do have struggles with my emotional landscape in that way of working out in real time how to handle a situation. I need to take time. Now, I'm not really the kind of person who has a massive blow up and is very explosive, but I also am not the kind of person who has a poker face and can walk around going, oh yeah, that's great, and then 3 days later come back and say, I really didn't like that. all of this for me, the anxiety I have around my identity, is coming from society, from the society interactions, and how I, as an autistic person, am often and frequently invalidated when I speak my truth or when I speak up for myself, as I know is my reality. It's not unusual for people to try and talk me down. Well, no, that's not what you mean, or that's not what you said, or I don't believe you were going to do that, you're lying. It's a bit of that, or it's a shutdown from the other person and they don't want to accept it because then it means that they have to accept that they have been mean or invalidating. So that is a big fear of mine. It's a key one, and it's very, very much part of autism. The other one is a loss of meaning. And meaning is really a grief that we feel inside of us when we feel that our life, that life in general, I suppose that life in general has no point and that our existence doesn't matter. I don't ever feel like this or relate to this. And when I say I don't ever, I'm talking about now. There might have been times, and especially as a teenager, when you have that, existential or crisis of self, where am I, who am I, what am I, where am I going, will I ever reach my full potential, what is the whole point of anything anyway? But even then, I don't think I had a big, dramatic loss of meaning. I've always felt quite curious about the world, as I mentioned before. There's a lot to do, a lot to investigate. I can keep myself busy, and most of my motivation in life comes from myself. It's autonomous, it's coming from inside. So there's not actually a lot that can happen in the outside world that makes me feel like my existence doesn't matter. To me, I don't necessarily have much to say beyond that, because I'm not one of those people who thinks even when I thought I was fairly important, I certainly don't think that the world revolves around me and that the world needs me in it. I'm just a person. But while I'm here, yes, my existence does matter, and it is important in as much as I have something to give, I have skills, and I really want to, enjoy those. And also, the world is a beautiful place, and I'm here to enjoy it and to make it even more beautiful in whatever way I can. So I never really feel a loss of meaning. So for me so far, out of the 3 we've done, there's only really one big one, and that's loss of identity. Loss of purpose is the next one, and purpose is the doing word, really. This one is, what are you doing? What is the point of what you're doing? Are you getting anything done? What is your purpose? What are you here to do? This actually does resonate with me a lot, and again, it's down to my neurobiology. I have purpose, I have meaning. I know what I want to get done and how I want to do it. But unfortunately, my brain chemistry and my body reality, my sensory, my proprioception, my interoception, everything can make this really hard. So I can set out with a plan. I am actually one of those people who is just naturally motivated. I don't have a problem with getting out of bed and getting on with stuff. But some days my brain isn't there. My brain chemistry is running out. I lose my mind, I guess. For me, it's always been more of a chemistry thing and a functionality thing than an emotional thing. I actually feel and have felt for a long time like my emotional landscape is a little bit separate to my other landscape of everything else, whether it's hormones or whatever. I don't actually attach. I feel like emotions for me are a slightly different thing. They're like an icing on my cake, I guess you could say. So they're somewhat detached, I guess, without being detached. They're just distant a little bit. So my emotional landscape is a little bit distant. So I can get up and have a purpose and start work for the day and drop things and break things and realise I haven't got what I thought I had and can't find anything. And I just know then that my day is not going to go as I wanted to or needed it to. My purpose isn't going to be fulfilled because I don't have the brain or body infrastructure to manage that. That does make me feel down, but mostly it makes me anxious because there's a limit in this planet to how long you can be unproductive and not meet your tasks or meet your goals. And usually for me, this is around work, and I'm in my work, my office, this is my laboratory, as I mentioned before, and I'm in here for a purpose, and that's because I have created my own work around what I like. I've got my laboratory in my garden, I've got my own consultancy and have had it for many, many years, and it's worked around my life when my children were younger and now they've gone. But even so, my work can bring me so much anxiety because it's a big trigger for me. There's so many things about being a professional chemist and working with other people and for other people that put me under stress emotionally, physically, mentally. They stretch all of my capacities. And I have deadlines and schedules like anybody else, and it can be a huge source of anxiety. So loss of identity and loss of purpose do come together as my autistic reality and what gives me my day-to-day anxiety. But my purpose isn't so much lost. I don't feel like, what am I doing this for? It's that my capacity to reach my purpose has been lost. And usually it comes back. But sometimes it can take a while. And that's another thing. Time is a thing, but I'll get to that in a bit. Fear of death and pain is another one. This is the final one. I don't have a big fear now of death and pain. I don't desire death or pain on myself or anyone else, but I accept it as part of being human, just the same as I accept feeling well and healthy and birth and, renewal. It is literally the circle of life, and I feel quite grateful that is not a big or even a little fear for me. It is what it is. I feel quite happy about saying that. So they're the primal fears, and that's generalised anxiety. The last thing I want to say is just the little, and they're not little, they're just headings and things that I do worry about, and then feeds into those core fear anxieties. So I've put these under 5 headings, and I am going to go very quick because I have talked a while already. My everyday anxiety triggers can be sensory, so that's one pot. They can be health in general, they can be social, they can be work, or they can be practicalities. Now I'm going to start with the practicalities actually, because I haven't mentioned this yet, but I worry and have an internal dialogue about things like rules. Have I broken the rule? What is the rule? What's the outline of this thing? I want to have an idea of what the protocols are. I might not agree with them or like them, but that's a different thing. That's an emotional response to the rules. I can deal with that separately, but I still appreciate and like to know what the protocols are. And not knowing them or not having a good sense of them, or knowing I know them, but then watching other people not respect them, is a source of anxiety for me. Money is another source of anxiety, and this is one that's triggered by a fear and a reality of how I grew up. Not having enough money. It was having money, but having money be a source of anxiety, having an anxious relationship with money, not having enough saved, not having enough at the right time, that kind of thing. So I worry about rules, I worry about money, I worry about social and political responsibilities. I had to go and vote today, and my heart rate was quite high because of the process of that. Again, not quite knowing the protocol and what was going to be on the sheet and would I recognise the people, but also the fact that I take the responsibility seriously and don't want to get it wrong. That kind of thing. And often what's linked to these practicalities and worries is the saying that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. That worries me in itself, and especially around these sort of things, because I value productivity, I value punctuality and, being polite and having manners and being reliable and being a good citizen and all of that. I value all of that, and I find it really hard to adjust my expectations of my performance, especially when some days I can perform really well and do everything great and other times I can't. So that's one thing, and that's pervasive because these things affect everything. At the other end of the scale, there was sensory, and this is fairly common for people who are neurodiverse, and especially with autism. I can get too hot and too cold because I don't have very good interoception. I can feel very comfortable in my clothes one minute and then extremely uncomfortable the next, and not know how I ever wore that thing. I can get overwhelmed and distracted in different environments, and again, that can then turn what was a productive good day into an absolute catastrophe, and I can't do any more. I have to go and lie down. Worst case scenario with sensory things, I can actually run out of capacity and have what they call a vestibular migraine, which is almost like vertigo. It feels like vertigo. So I worry about those things happening when I'm in that sensory world. I'm not anxious about it, I'm then dealing with it. So there is a difference. So I'm either anxious about it happening or I'm dealing with it. It doesn't not happen. These things do happen frequently. So my anxiety is somewhat warranted, but not helpful, and not to the level that it happens. Health is really a protection of my capacity. So I worry about health because I'm always trying to maintain my capacity and look after myself. So rest, digest, feed, breed, I guess is the thing you'd say, like the animal instincts. Like I'm trying to create a life for myself that's balanced. So I'm constantly trying to rebalance, recalibrate, regroup in a world that doesn't really function well that way. It's very hard to have that kind of routine. So that's an anxiety of mine, keeping my health good in spite of a lumpy lifestyle and changes. Social is, again, fairly understandable for people with autism, I guess, and for me in particular. I don't have social anxiety. I can talk on a stage. I don't have problems with talking to different levels of society or whatever authority, but I do struggle with understanding the motivations and the meanings of in conversation and when I meet people. So I can be manipulated in the moment, taken advantage of. I can come across as different to what I want to because of this difference in communication style. I do worry before, during and after social events. It doesn't stop me, but I do have a tendency to be quite anxious about that. And then finally, as I said, work, and I think that I've covered that quite well with the executive function, the lumpy capacity. So I'm talking about my values. I'm talking about, for me, I want to show up and be a reliable, helpful, dependable person, but so often I can't be, and that disconnect is painful, and it gives me anxiety that I'm going to keep repeating that. So that is my anxiety. That's not all of it, but that's the bulk of it. And I think, as you'll agree, that there's quite a lot of that is very much fed by and maintained by being autistic. And yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Being autistic is not easy. I mean, I wouldn't know what it's like to not be autistic, but I do know what it's like to be autistic and not know it. And that was probably worse. So thank you for listening. I'll come back with some other videos another time, but hopefully that's been helpful.